Hey all, my name is Professor Luce, and today we're here to talk about Part 8. And really, what these chapters focus on are areas where you might be giving a presentation outside of being a student. So, they could be meetings that you might have with other people, they could potentially be a job interview. There's lots of different arenas where you might have to do something in a sort of an atypical situation. And I do wish the textbook went into more detail, especially with online presentations, but I think at least getting exposed to some of this information is going to be helpful to you in the long run. There's a couple of things that are important to note. I do know with the small group that you all tend to hate small group projects, but welcome to the world. You're going to have to do small group projects at some point or another. I know the major complaints. There are always going to be things like, well, so and so didn't do their job, or they're not doing as good work as I could do, or it's hard to get everybody together, or there's a lack of communication. So there's a couple of things that are really key about working with a small group, and not just in academia, but in the real world as well. First is the most important, which is clear communication. And it means that you want to set up rules and guidelines for what you should be doing as a group. And sometimes those can be a little bit more informal depending on how well you know each other. But when people are not crystal clear about what the expectations for them are, that's when issues are bound to arise. So you want to make sure that you have a good way to communicate with each other those expectations as a group, whatever norms you want to set, within the confines of your assignment. That's going to be up to you as a group. Second, you want to put somebody in charge of communication and disseminating information to the rest of the group. You can apply formal roles to people within a group. So if you want to designate someone as a leader, someone as a secretary, etc., you can do that. Sometimes it can be a little bit more informal, but it should be very, very clear who would be taking notes at a meeting, who would be responsible for disseminating pertinent information. And if that changes, that's fine, but just make sure that's very, very clear. By having one person in charge of disseminating communication, it helps to make sure that things aren't missed and make sure that everybody gets everything in a timely fashion. Other things you want to do is set up checkpoints for not just yourself but for other people. That allows other group members to step in case someone else is falling behind. You should try to remain friendly with everybody. That doesn't mean you have to joke around and goof around the entire time, but it does mean that you can always provide constructive criticism in a way that's better received when you get along with those people. And if you think about it, think about your friends that you have. They may tell you something that you take a little bit better than maybe if your boss were to tell you that information or a stranger were to tell you that information. So it's one thing to consider that there's a group dynamic at play, and that does alter how we receive information. So it is helpful to have good relationships with people in the group. Outside of that, there's always going to be the flaws with small groups that we have, but really they are beneficial because you get some really great ideas by working with other people. You can take one idea and it goes 3 steps down the line, it becomes a fantastic idea, and by collaborating you get everybody's knowledge input rather than just one person's perspective, and overall you're going to have a better end result. Another thing I want to talk about are online presentations. I won't spend too much time on this. It does depend whether it's live or recorded. I know the textbook talks about a couple of things, but just like any other speech, you're always going to want to practice ahead of time. And that may seem kind of odd because it's online. You're like, it'll be fine. I can just edit the video. But you can't edit everything out. You can't edit content out. It's really hard to do it without making it choppy. And realistically, by practicing, you're going to know the content a lot better. So it's going to be overall a better presentation. You want to practice with any presentational aids. You want to make sure that you review the presentational aids ahead of time. Make sure there aren't any spelling errors, any typos, that sort of thing. And then practice utilizing them so you're familiar with the technology. Especially if it's a live presentation online, you only get one chance. So you absolutely have to practice ahead of time. But even with a recorded session, I would encourage you to practice a couple of times. That way it hopefully will limit how many times you have to record, and from there you'll get a better end result. With online presentations, you also want to think about things like camera angle, what sort of technology you're going to be using, what sort of technology others will have access to as well. I think this semester and actually really anything past COVID, we're all getting a lot more practice in online presentations just because it's the nature of the world we live in right now. And realistically, a lot more jobs are going to be available online, or at least online meetings, and that's a good thing, right? Like, it means you may not have to travel into work in bigger cities. Saving a commute is fantastic. You may not want to live in this area for the rest of your life, so that could be something that's extremely helpful. It's more comfortable to be a stay at home rather than going into work for maybe 1 or 2 meetings at a time. So there are definitely some advantages to it, but you also want to be conscious of the environment that you're in it recording in. And I think most of you are already there because you have to be aware of that for your speeches anyways. All right, that's all I have to say about part 8. The chapters are pretty easy this week, so hopefully you understand it. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to ask. Thank you. Have a good rest of your week.